Hello, thanks for stopping by. Let me introduce myself. My name is Joe. I'm an old, happily retired software engineer. But despite having spent a lifetime churning out for loops and if statements for a living, I still enjoy writing code to keep what's left of what I laughingly call my brain active. Back when the world was all stuck inside by COVID, I got interested in 3D printing and bought an Ender 3 Pro filament printer and later an Elegoo Mars 2 resin printer. Of course, I needed some software to create models to print. But being a software developer, I have a built-in aversion to buying anything I can write myself. It's not really that I'm tight-fisted or think I can do it better than anyone else. I know I can't. It's more that I enjoy figuring out how things actually work. And one of the best ways to do that is to try doing it yourself. So I created a 3D modeling program called Barnacle, really just so I could explore some of the ideas and mathematical principles behind it all. I'm not an expert on any of this. Technically, on paper, at least, I am a mathematician of sorts, but it's been many years since I last wrestled any equations in earnest. Now I'm retired, I have a bit more time to spend on projects of my own, and I thought I'd share what Barnacle can do with you. Maybe some of you might find it useful to make your own models, or you might just be interested in sharing some of the development steps that are involved in if you're thinking of writing your own modeler. Rather than dryly going through the various tools and options that are in the program, I thought I would actually use it to make the sort of model that I imagine a typical user might like. And the first models I made with it were either kits for armored fighting vehicles or aircraft, usually in 1/35th or 1/72nd scale. That's just what I was interested in at the time. But I've also used it to make bits and bobs for the family's model railway. To be clear, we're talking Thomas the Tank Engine and so on, not award-winning layouts. It originally belonged to my eldest daughter, passed to my middle daughter, then on to the younger daughter. And now it's gone to my grandkids. So I've started making a few buildings and accessories that I can replace easily after they break them, because that's what grandkids are for, right? I'm going to start by showing how to make a simple 00 scale wagon. I won't pretend to be an expert railway modeler, that would be a lie. So the model would be quite simple and generic, but it would make a good starting point for someone with more skill. I'll show you how it can be done as a kit of parts to be assembled after printing, or as a single print, a whole model. I'm going to show how to model a generic wagon chassis and a couple of bodies to go with it. It will probably take a few videos to do because, despite what people like to say, 3D modeling is never trivial. It's like any skill. It takes practice and patience and a degree of learning from your mistakes. And hopefully this video will encourage you to give it a go, either using Barnacle or some other modeler. So let's get started. This is the basic chassis and base, fresh from printing and curing. All I've done here really is added some wheels just to give a better impression of what it would look like. The couplings are rather chunky too, but that's because the resin itself is fairly brittle and they need to be this large in order to withstand normal use. You could replace them by metal ones if you really wanted to. Here I've modelled a wagon body based on an existing one that we already have in our set, and I've added it to the chassis just to give an idea of what a completed wagon might look like. Here we have an alternative body sitting on the same chassis. This just has a bit more detail added to the sides and the ends and a slightly different roof. A simple 3-plank wagon, it could just as easily be a 5-plank, 7-plank, or maybe a salt wagon or even an oil tanker. The main point is that this chassis is reusable and you can model any body you like to go on top of it. Now, you could model a wagon chassis like this entirely from imagination within the modeler itself. Or maybe you're lucky enough to have a complete set of technical drawings for a specific wagon that you're trying to make. In this case, I decided I would draft some rough plans myself before starting. It is inevitable that there will be a bit of back and forth between the drawing and the 3D model. So really you want to use an application here that enables you to go back and modify things, change numbers, stretch shapes and so on. I decided to use the Inkscape drawing package. It's full-featured, very flexible, allows you to go back and make as many modifications as you like, and of course it's free. I'm using version 107 of Barnacle, and the first thing I'm going to do with it is just create a new project. I'm going to use the basic template and type in the name for this new project that I'm trying to create, which will be W Rail Wagon Base. And yep, and hit the create button. This will create a project structure containing a number of folders and a default model file called untitled.txt. You can see the project on the tree here on the left. There we are. Yeah, we're in untitled at the moment, but I'm going to go ahead and create a specific model for the chassis bed. So I'm just adding a new file here, type in the new name. If the OK button is showing, that means that you've got a valid name. Press that, and there we are. We've moved to the chassis.txt. So the first piece I'm actually going to put into the project is going to be the chassis bed. I'm going to make that out of a plank wall. Yeah, I know it's a wall, but it works fine for this. I'm simply going to type in the dimensions that we took off the plans from Inkscape. As I tab off each of these controls, then the shape is regenerated. Cool, that will do. So I'll just close the dialog. And there we go. And that's our first part, which I'll select now by clicking on it. I think I'll change the color of it to something more pretty. It's useful to have the individual parts different colors whenever you're actually making an assembly out of it, so you can separate the parts in your mind. Oh, and I'll change its name to something more useful. How about chassis bed? Right, now because we might want to print this on an FDM printer, I'm going to lay it flat and center it in the bed. By the way, the green mark that you can see here on the screen, the green square, actually marks the limits of the end of free printer's bed. I tend to use that by default, although you can choose other marker sizes. There we are. Let's have a look at that then. Looks okay to me. So now I'm going to make the second piece, which I think is going to be a side beam. I'm going to use a primitive for this, just a shallow beam object. There we are, it's a bit chunky. I'm going to rotate it so that it's lying flat on the bed. I'm going to floor it by pressing F for floor. Lovely. I'm going to make it the same length as the chassis because basically they have to fit. Now I'll adjust the height and width to the values that are given in the Inkscape plan. And once I've done this, I will move the beam in front of the bed. I'll do that by stacking it. It's just a convenient way of getting it into place. So I select the bed, then select the beam, and then stack in front. That causes a little bit of an overlap, so I'm going to actually drag the beam a few millimeters this way. So if we print it like this, then they won't get stuck together, basically. So now let's decorate the beam a little bit by putting a pill on it. Now the pill basically comes out looking like a plate, mechanical plate. There we are. And move it to where the marker is by selecting it and hitting M. I'm going to rotate it back onto the bed again, onto the floor rather. There we go. And I think I'll just make a fairly arbitrary size. The details of this are not terribly important. It's really just a little bit of decoration to add a bit of interest onto the beam. Cool. And I'm going to make another one of those by actually just cloning that existing one. So I'll select it and then hit clone. No, there are actually two objects sitting in the same place, and the second one of them will be selected now. So I'm using the cursor keys to move it to the right a little bit. In fact, I'm going to space them out a little bit more. I'll grab this one and move them to the left a little bit. Now I'm going to join these two pills to turn them into a single object by using the group union. I won't worry too much about the name of this at the moment. It's only decorations. So now I'm going to place these pills on top of the beam. I'm just going to stack them above. It's just a convenient way of getting them into roughly the right place. And then I'm going to move them to the left end of the beam and then use the cursor keys to shift them along a little bit to just to some arbitrary place that will look nice. Now I'm going to push them down onto the floor. Right, that's probably about right, isn't it? No, okay, about there. So if we look at the side, you can see the effect that we're getting really. We've just got a couple of extra plates have been added into the back of the beam. So now I'm going to group those together using a union. And this time I'll take the opportunity to actually set the name of the object correctly. Cool. Let's change the color of that to something that's not quite so drab. I think on the plans they were blue, weren't they? So well, that's blue will be fine for this. And we need two of these beams, so I'm going to clone this one and simply use the cursor keys to push them back behind the bed. I think I'll just make sure everything's on the floor, and yeah, there we are. So we have a chassis bed and two side beams. I'll save that now just to make sure it doesn't escape from us. So the next part I'm going to make will be the subframe. This just gives a bit of structure to the chassis, really. I'm going to make it out of the rectangular grid, I think. I think this needs to be just a little bit shorter than the chassis bed because of the end plates that we'll be adding later. In this case, the height is actually the width of the chassis bed because we're going to be laying it flat in a moment. You don't need a frame around it. I think we need two verticals. No, actually, I think we need three verticals. Let's put that back. But I will thicken them up a little bit. It's the horizontals that we need two of. And I'll thicken those again. Okay, that's the main part. I'm just going to move this into the center of the screen using the cursor keys. The subframe needs an end cap, well, at each end really, with slightly rounded edges. So I'm going to make one using a squircle, which is a circular square or a square circle. I think we want all of the edges rounded there. I'm going to make that the same as the chassis bed width. There isn't an option on this to set the thickness, so it's come out, I think, at default thickness, which is like 10. So I'm going to stack that squircle to the right of the subframe. Yeah, it is a bit thick, so I'm going to adjust the size. I'll make the squircle object the same width as the frame. Cool. Now I'm going to clone that object because we need another one at the other end of the subframe. I'll just move it to the right a little bit so it's out of the way. I think I think that should be in a little bit. That's fine. So now I'll group those two together. Don't worry about the name at the moment. And now I'm going to stack the. Actually, I'm not stacking them. I'm aligning here, aren't I? I align the one at the other edge and join them together, as you might expect. Awesome. That's our subframe. Let's change its name to something more meaningful. And I think we'll change its color. Oddly, picking a color for these things seems to be one of the hardest things to do. Something nice. Yeah, well, that's fine. And I'm going to rotate that onto the bed and floor it. I think I'll close the distance between them a little bit by stacking that and maybe then pulling it forward and just another millimeter or two. So that's it. That's our subframe completed as well. I think I should save this maybe again before it gets away from us. Actually, I've just noticed that I've got the size of the chassis bed wrong, so I'm going to adjust it. It's just this width value I haven't allowed for the thickness of the side beams. So there we are. Just change that to 29.25. And I think I might have to just move the side beams a little bit just to make sure that they're not overlapping. Let's have a look. Oh, actually, they're not quite overlapping, but I still think I'll move them anyway. I'll just move this one back a little, just a millimeter or two. Oh, and the other one. That's fine. That's fine. So now I think I better save that again so we don't lose it. Cool. Now we're going to make the end plates. I think I'll make the first one basically out of a primitive square or cube here. So there. Oops, it's an odd place to put it, but that'll do. Let's start by making the cube the same width as the chassis bed. That's cool. Now we'll adjust the size of the cube itself to make it, yeah, it only needs to be 1 millimeter thick, I think. And probably, was it 5.5 millimeters, the other dimension? That looks about right. Okay, I'm going to move it into the center here so we can handle it a bit better. I'll put the cursor on the bed and then select the object and press M to move it there and floor it by pressing F. Cool, so I'm going to clone this object now. I'm going to do that by just selecting it and pressing Control K. And I have two objects, as you can see, that are identical. I'll move the second one to the right a little bit. And I'm going to change its dimensions a little bit. This is going to form the, well, I don't know what you would call it really, the plug that goes into the end of the chassis. In effect, I'm taking off the 2 times the width of the side beams here. Oh, I'm having a bit of finger trouble typing this number in here. I just want this to be quite small. Come on, I'm struggling here with the keyboard. So now I'm going to stack the thin one on top of the fatter one. And I think I'll group them together into a single object here. Select the bottom one, then the top one, and group. Shouldn't take long to union these because they're quite small. I'll set that name now to end plate. Let's position it to the left of the chassis bed. Just using stack to get it roughly into place, and then I'll manipulate it a wee bit better. Move them away and then floor it. Yep. And I'm going to clone that to make the other one. I'll change the name. That's better. And I'll move the clone to the right hand side of the chassis bed. Again, I'm just using stack to get it roughly into position, then I'll adjust it. Yeah, give a little bit of gap there and then floor it. Yep. Cool. Right, I think we'll save that then. I'm now going to make an assembly. That is a copy of the chassis model, but where everything is aligned for printing on a resin printer. So first of all, I'm going to make a new folder to keep our assemblies in. Let's call it something useful like assemblies. And I think within there I'm going to have a new file called chassis assembly. Chassis assembly, come on. It literally just means that we're going to have all the parts of the chassis in here, but they'll be assembled into a single model. So now I'm going to reference the original chassis file, which means that we will be making, taking a read-only copy of all of the objects that are in there. We can't modify them. If we do want them modified, we have to go back to the original file. But there we are. So now I'm simply going to flip the chassis bed right over. Cool. And I'm going to flip the side beam, the front side beam towards us. And I'll stack that above the chassis bed to get it to the right vertical position, and then I will align the fronts of those two objects while I've still got them selected. Cool. Now I'm going to flip the second chassis beam, or side beam, away from me. I'm going to stack that on top of the chassis bed. And I'm going to align the backs this time. And the subframe I'm simply going to place directly on top of the chassis bed. A roll friend stack above. Cool. So moving on to the first end plate, I'm going to rotate that into a vertical position and floor it. I think I'll stack it against the subframe to get it roughly into position. And then I'm just going to use the cursor keys, in fact shift cursor keys, to move it by 1/10 of a millimeter until it just visually looks right. I think that's about it. I'm going to repeat that with the second side plate. Rotate it, floor it, then stack it against the right of this subframe. Didn't bother stacking. And move it 1/10 of a millimeter visually to get it into position. Yep, that seems okay. And there we have a completed chassis bed. So I think I'll save that now before it gets away from us again. So I think that's probably enough for this video. In the next one, we will go ahead and add some buffers. We'll construct and add some wheel mounts. Obviously, they're pretty important. And we'll add some detail in the form of the brake frames. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, don't forget to like and subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next one.